Good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Welcome to Conspiracy Corner Podcast. I'm your host, Abe Williams. My co-host and beautiful wife, Sammy, is not here. So I'm going to go ahead and do it solo today. Unfortunately, she works first shift and I work third, so such is life. Today we're going to do part 4. I think we're on part 4 of the Loch Ness Monster podcast. Sorry I couldn't do it all on one part, but it's kind of hard the way I work and where I'm living, trying to find a little corner to do it in. That's ironic. I didn't even think about it, Conspiracy Corner. But today we're going to be doing a little history on the Sturgeon's photograph. So we'll go ahead and I'll get started on that. See what you guys think, and here we go. The year was 1933. The United States was in the throes of the Great Depression. Prohibition was repealed. Wiley Post became the first person to fly solo around the world. Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany. King Kong premiered. Alcatraz became a federal penitentiary. The board game Monopoly was invented, and there was the first drive-in theater open. And in Scotland, the Loch Ness Monster was sighted for the first time in the modern era. On July 22nd, purportedly by George Spicer and his wife. By November of that year, Hugh Gray captured the first photographs of the phenomenon that was to become worldwide known as Nessie. But the first famous Nessie photo of all was provided by Dr. Robert Kenneth Wilson, a London gynecologist. The picture was published in the Daily Mail the following year and established the Loch Ness Monster as an international sensation. The shot became known as the Sturgeon's photograph due to Wilson's disinclination to have his name associated with it. Wilson had good reason too, since the whole thing was a fraud. One, however, that wouldn't be exposed for 6 decades. The fraud was so complete, in fact, that Wilson didn't even take the picture. It had all happened in a rather roundabout way. I just think it's funny he's a gynecologist. Elephant or hippopotamus? In 1933, before the famed photo was taken, the Daily Mail sought a newsstand sensation to increase in circulation. The newspaper commissioned big game hunter Marmaduke Wetherall to locate the supposed sea serpent of Loch Ness. He found it, or so he claimed. Wetherall's evidence was swiftly debunked by zoologists at the Natural History Museum in London. An umbrella stand made for the taxiderm foot of a hippopotamus had been used to create large but carelessly identical footprints. Wetherall smarted from exposure and planned an exposure of a different kind. Now ridiculed by his former employees at the Daily Mail, Wetherall apparently concocted a second deception so that he could savor a bit of revenge against the newspaper. In cahoots with Wetherall was his son Ian and Ian's stepbrother, Christian Sperling. Ian purchased a 10-toy submarine from Woolworth's store, as well as some wood putty. Christian used the wood putty to sculpt the head and neck of Nessie over the tower of the toy submersible. Approximately a foot high, the mock-up was floating with a ballast strip made of lead along the bottom to keep it stable. After testing the device in a pond, the men took it to Loch Ness and photographed it somewhere near the halfway house tea room. I ain't gonna lie, just for fun, I've always wanted to hoax a Bigfoot sighting or a UFO sighting or the Loch Ness sighting, a sea monster sighting, just for fun. But I know as soon as I would, it would like ruin my name within the conspiracy community, the truth community. I don't know, you would be known as like a hoaxer from then on, so nobody could trust you for like the rest of your life. You'd lose all credibility. But I do think just for fun, like straightforward, it would be fun to try to hoax something like that, you know? I don't know, not lie about it, not try to make fame out of it. Just be like, look, I'm going to try to hoax it. Let's see how good it turns out, you know, if it's believable. When I used to work as a bartender, I told this guy, because me and my wife go hiking all the time, I was like, man, I want to start like a secret hiking group. Call it the Secret Society of the Sasquatch, to where like anytime any one of us in the club goes hiking, we all dress as like Sasquatch, you know, and kind of go off trail. See how many sightings we can get reported. I don't know, just stupid shit like that. What I think would be fun. At the approach of a water bailiff, a park ranger specifically for bodies of water, Weatherall sank the model with his foot. Ian later appended that it was presumably still somewhere in Loch Ness. Morris Chambers, an insurance agent, passed the photographic plates from Weatherall's excursion to Dr. Wilson, a man said to enjoy a practical joke, who delivered them to an Inverness chemist shop called Ogston's, where a man named George Morrison developed them. Then Wilson, banking on the fact that his reputation as a doctor would be abet the believability of his story, sold the first photo to the Daily Mail. The image became as big as a sensation as the monster itself, so big, in fact, that none of its perpetrators wanted to risk notoriety to admitting to the elaborate hoax. In the following years, various real-world explanations for the most celebrated Nessie photo of all arose. The blurry, mysterious shot was actually a piece of driftwood, an otter, or a seabird, or even an elephant, a species not known to frequent the Scottish Highlands. Realistically, a monster was more likely than a pachyderm, which would have to be imported and couldn't actually have lived in the loch. In 1975, Ian Weatherall told the Sunday Telegraph that the photo was fake. Every aspect of the picture, including the way it was cropped, came under the microscope of public doubt. It was maintained that the object that appeared to be Nessie's head and neck was actually being towed across the loch, and certain marks on the negative suggested that the monster was only 2 or 3 feet long. Yet the findings were inconclusive, and the Telegraph article eventually sank into obscurity. You know what kind of sucks about all these hoaxers and stuff? It's like once one person hoaxes something, it kind of almost shits. It's like a turd in a punch bowl. It ruins the whole thing almost. It's kind of sad in a way. Some years after school teacher Alistair Boyd and his wife claimed to have experienced their own Loch Ness Monster sighting in 1979, a friend of Boyd's named David Martin directed Alistair to 1975 Sunday Telegraph article. And this isn't Crowley, this is Alistair Boyd. Ian Weatherall's testimony was only one man's word, and Boyd investigated further. It was he who learned of the connection between Maurice Chambers and Dr. Wilson, and further, he paid particular attention to Ian Weatherall's claim that the far shoreline of Loch Ness was visible in the background of the shot, which was true of the original photo, but not of the Daily Mail's published version, which had been cropped. Ian Weatherall, who would not have known that, claimed Boyd unless he himself took the picture or participated in the scheme. Boyd and Martin tracked down Christian Sperling, by then aged 93, who came clean in 1993, and noted that the plot had worked better than any of the participants had ever expected. Despite the crushing revelation, Boyd remained a true believer in Nessie. I am so convinced of the reality of the creatures that would actually stake my life on their existence, he said. There's no evidence like bad evidence. When not obvious fakes, the photographic record in regard to Nessie is particularly poor and immediately reminiscent of the reams of tragically bad snapshots of the unidentified flying objects that have likewise burdened history. Nearly a century has passed since 1933, and all the evidence consists of overhyped sightings and blurry photos. Indeed, the lack of physical corroboration argues overwhelmingly against the monster. No unknown bones have ever been found in Loch Ness. The loch itself is too small for such creatures to be living and breeding there. The lone monster theories countermines every logical understanding of how animals breed, and most importantly, the water is too cold and opaque to allow for the submerged survival of a dinosaur or of any cold-blooded animal. Ever since Loch Ness opened itself up to tourists, and amateur speculation in the 1930s, abetted by usual media hysterics and unreliable journalism, there has been one mundane, inescapable truth. Over 1 million people visit Loch Ness annually. Nearly 85% of these visitors come because of Nessie. That injects nearly $55 million into the local economy every year. But sea serpents are a lot sexier than statistics. And many more photographs have been taken over the years, which raises the question, do any of them actually authentically show the monster? But yeah, that's the story. That's the Sturgeon's photograph story for you. That's probably the most famous one that I've heard of growing up, and the most famous one. I'll show the image of it. I think that's pretty much like the most famous classic Loch Ness, photo. And sadly, like I said earlier, it's a turd in the punch bowl, kind of ruins the whole thing. But yeah, I think I got one more podcast. Speaking about, well, actually, let's see what else I got on here. I might have some more I can give you today.